welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to talk about a little quirk about if a mouthpiece or actually a horn, whether it's a saxophone. In this case, I have a tenor here, which is a prime example of what I'll be talking about. But it can also happen on clarinets, more specifically like alto and bass clarinets. What we're talking about is if you ever had a horn, in this case a saxophone, that was very mouthpiece picky. And what I'm talking about is anytime you transition from G to A above the staff, for instance, your mouthpiece, you would squeak. Why is it every time it squeaks except on certain mouthpieces? In this case, when the octave pip is too big, it requires a large tip mouthpiece and a harder reed. And we're going to look into that right now. So about, I don't remember, 15, 20 years ago, I can't remember anymore, I wrote an article on my website of issues I was having with saxophones where customers were having issues too, and I really couldn't figure it out until I actually had one myself. When I was looking at buying another tenor, a Selmer Mark 7 tenor, I play tested two of them, and it didn't react anything like my other one. It was a very powerful horn. It was a monster horn, where you can put as much air through it as you want, and it just filled up the room. It's a great, stage horn if you're with a singer and a few other instruments. But the trouble is, if you weren't playing it in a monster situation, you wanted to play more subdued, it would always squeak between the G and A transition just above the staff. This is where the mechanism actually changes from the and opens up the body octave pip. So I wrote this article on my website, and this also I found out transitions to the clarinet too, because I also worked with some clarinets that were. I remember there's a LeBlanc alto clarinet I worked on where it played nicely, but it was just really, really tame sounding. And I increased the body octave pip just a little bit, and it just changed the sound altogether. It became more powerful when you wanted it to. It just sounded so much more better. I was able to fill up, the room where you're playing. It was just like a completely different horn. Anyways, this is the article I wrote, and I said when someone buys saxophone, the last thing they want to do is squeaking notes. And in this case, we're talking about the G to A transition. And many times you'll get players saying, oh, you need to work on your air control. But what I found out, because used to have good air control, but we have to understand what's going on with the instrument, because why is one instrument plays good and the other one doesn't? What's the difference between the instruments? Basically here I have the saxophone X versus the saxophone Y. And why must air support in this transition area be much more controlled than the rest of the saxophone? Now, before I go on, I want to take a look at another website real quickly. If you just Google pantyhose octave pip neck saxophone, you'll see a lot of hits on this. And they talk about hits from the octave pip and stuff like this. But I remember this was one of the solutions to fixing that GA issue where you put pantyhose or something to block the total airflow from that pip. Now, this is an example from Music Medic, but this is for a hissing from the neck octave. And what they did is they basically put pantyhose over the octave pip here. This was the same solution people used for the body octave also. All this does, when it creates a problem of sealing, but all this does is it reduces really the airflow out of the body octave pip or reduces the diameter in the pip, because it takes up some space blocking the air. So that's really what was going on. And what I was getting at here was basically, why must one go on a mouthpiece hunt every time they buy a new saxophone? Because they buy a new saxophone, it's a monster horn, but they squeak and it's mouthpiece sensitive. Is it the player's technique? What's wrong with the previous mouthpiece? More importantly, what's different between the saxophone? Now, if you ever had a bunch of saxophones at the same time, for instance, I've had Yamahas, Cannonballs, Selmers, Cuffs, all at the same time. You can play test A, B, C, D. And what's the difference between them? There's a lot of, design differences to them. But why is one just kind of out of whack compared to the other ones, especially the same model? So I bought a new sax. I mentioned I play tested a couple and I bought one. And it had this issue. I'm like, I'm going to figure out why we have this issue. And I had it before with customers' horns, where most of the time, if you test a tenor, I would use my Koff 6J mouthpiece, which is fairly open to 3.5 inch reed. At least I did back then. And the mouthpiece is large enough and the reed was hard enough where the pressure difference with a too large a body octave didn't affect the reed and the mouthpiece combination as much. But you put on a summer C star, C double star, and you get a squeak. And why is that? What exactly is going on? And as I mentioned, the body octave is a role in the saxophone with this example. I mentioned here Monster 7, but I noticed when I was changing mouthpieces and reeds that there's a large fluctuation in the back pressure in my mouth when blowing through the horn, especially going over the G to A break, is the air pressure just disappear out of my mouth. And that's when basically the reed would slap against the mouthpiece. So having different examples of different size mouthpieces that you like can help you identify what's actually going on. And if you're sensitive to feeling things in your mouth and how you're playing, it can really help also. So basically what I did, I was talking to Gary Foray Tools in Kalamazoo. I've been there for classes, I don't remember, 20 years ago and stuff, 25 years ago. And he was telling me what the size diameter of the body octave pips for sixes were, six tenors, and compared to the seven was like, 30-40% bigger. And I had drills. I remember other horns I worked on where it made this body octave pip a little bit bigger to make the horn sound much more larger than it is while still maintaining a balance with the mouthpiece. And I never really made one really, really big until I bought one that was too big. And what I basically created was a cap. I'm showing the video real quickly, a cap to cover the body octave pip where I could change the size of it. And I slowly made it bigger and bigger until it was a nice full sounding horn without being a monster horn unless I pushed it. But it's still good for classical playing in a large orchestra or whatever. And this cap basically smoothed out the pressure change from G to A. And it really worked well. And there's another, I can't remember the other gentleman repairer who did this on clarinets too, made it screw-on caps or something. He had the same problem at about the same time. And we both learned basically the same thing. So we gotta keep in mind though that, diameter size of tone holes may affect everything about the saxophone. So, the body octave pip has a large thing to do with the tone, the response, the playability of the instrument itself. And this really eliminated this G to A squeaky issue altogether. Now let's take a quick look at my, you'll see it's a Mark 7 I had here right now. It's an early Mark 7. We'll take a quick look at it right now. So what I'm talking about is on the saxophone is when you go from a G or G sharp to an A, what happens is the body octave pip over here with the thumb open, it will open up. So the body octave pip is there's a little hole underneath there. Little hole underneath there, and that's the body octave pip in there. Now as you can see, I have a covering over mine, an epoxy covering, where I'm able to change the diameter of the hole. And I basically started out with a thin hole and made it bigger and bigger. When it was really small, this horn is the perfect classical saxophone. Nice and smooth. Dynamics are a little bit more controlled. It wasn't a big monster horn. Before I did this, this was a really big monster horn, had a big diameter on the body pip, and it was really sensitive to mouthpiece and reed selection. It really required a large tip mouthpiece and a harder reed. Because what I noticed happen on smaller tip mouthpieces is that the pressure, the back pressure I get in my mouth simply disappeared when this body octave pip opened. And then the reed would slap against the mouthpiece and squeak. So you get a bunch of squeaks. So if you have a horn that's mouthpiece sensitive between G and A, this is probably the issue right here. So it's something to look out for. This is an early Mark 7. The later Mark 7s had the same problems because I also tested a later Mark 7 with no engraving and different lacquer. So I hope that short discussion may help you understand what may be going on with your horn. if it seems really mouthpiece picky, especially in certain transitions. So don't forget to give a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I don't know if you noticed, because someone emailed me before about mouthpieces, but on 7 I use a silver neck and usually a old Selmer metal mouthpiece, classical mouthpiece. For hard rubber ones, I actually have this is actually a factory gold plated neck that I use for hard rubber mouthpieces. Maybe that'll be another one, is the differences between silver necks, gold necks, metal mouthpieces, hard rubber mouthpieces. Anyways, I hope you liked it. Any comments or questions, please put it down below. We'll see you next time.